In the heart of the 17th century, one woman was responsible for the deaths of over 600 men. The deaths weren't caused by a queen ordering armies into battle or a plague sweeping through the cobblestone streets. It was the quiet, methodical work of an Italian chemist named Giulia Tofana. She sold a secret formula to unhappy wives, a product so subtle, so chemically perfect, that for decades, no one even knew the murders were happening. Her victims simply grew weak and died. Their deaths were blamed on a sudden fever, a lingering sickness, or the mysterious will of God. The history books have a simple label for her. They call her the most successful female serial killer in history. But this simple label hides a much deeper, more revolutionary secret. How did one woman, in an age with no advanced chemistry, create a weapon so precise it was considered a work of art? The answer had nothing to do with magic. It was all about science, a lost chapter in the history of toxicology, hidden from the world in plain sight. By the end of this journey, you will understand that Giulia Tofana was so much more than a murderer. You will see her as she truly was. The most brilliant and most dangerous self-taught chemist of her time. But a scientific mind like that is not born in a vacuum. It is forged. And to understand the weapon she created, we must first step into the brutal, gilded cage that was a 17th century marriage. We must step into the suffocating world of the 17th century Italy. It was a world of breathtaking art and unbending faith, a world of violent contradiction. And for women, it was a gilded cage. For them, marriage had little to do with matters of the heart. It was a financial transaction, a political maneuver. To forge alliances or secure family wealth, it was common for young women, some still in their teenage years, to be married to older, more established men. Their wedding dress, heavy with silk and thread, might as well have been a shroud. Once married, a woman ceased to be her own person. Legally, she was property. First, she belonged to her father. Then, she belonged to her husband. Divorce, for a woman, was an impossibility. It simply did not exist. The popular saying was telling, marriage or the wall. The wall was a convent, the only other respectable path. And within the home, a husband's authority was absolute. Society didn't view domestic abuse as a crime. It was actually seen as a husband's right, a tool to ensure his wife's obedience. For thousands of women, a marriage certificate was a life sentence, a sentence of servitude, loneliness, and fear, with no chance of parole. What would you do in a situation with absolutely no way out? The only escape was death, her husband's death. This desperation created a silent, hidden market, a market for a very specific and very permanent kind of solution. Giulia Tofana was born into this world of gilded cages and silent desperation. She was born in Palermo, Sicily, around the year 1620. Her story and her dark education in the chemical arts began with her own mother, Tofania d'Adamo. In 1633, when Giulia was still a young girl, her mother was publicly executed. Her crime was poisoning her own abusive husband. This horrific event went beyond being a simple childhood trauma for Giulia. For her, it was an education. She saw with her own eyes the ultimate price for a failed attempt at freedom. The lesson was brutal. If you are going to strike back, you cannot afford to fail. Legend says her mother passed down the original recipe for the poison, a dangerous family secret, born of suffering. But Giulia didn't just inherit a formula. She inherited a mission. She would take her mother's crude work and perfect it. She would make it safe. She would make it undetectable. And she would make it available to any woman who felt the cold stone walls of her life closing in. She spent her youth in the fragrant, cluttered world of apothecaries. She learned the public science of healing herbs, of balms and tinctures, and in the shadows she learned the secret science of their lethal potential. She eventually moved, first to Naples, and then to the bustling heart of the Papal States, Rome. There she established the perfect front for her growing enterprise, a cosmetics business. In an era where toxic substances like arsenic and lead were common ingredients in women's makeup, her deadly laboratory could hide in plain sight. The sweet smell of rosewater could easily mask the acrid scent of a simmering poison. This is the moment her story truly begins. Julia is no longer just a survivor, the daughter of an executed woman. She is a scientist in her own right. She refines the old family recipe, transforming it from a desperate measure into a masterpiece of chemical deception. She gives her creation a brand name. She calls it Aqua Tofana. With a name and a perfect formula, her chemical empire was born. But as we will see, it wasn't the poison itself that would eventually bring her down. It was the terrifying idea her science represented. An idea so revolutionary that the most powerful institution on Earth would be forced to hunt her not as a criminal, but as a heretic. The scientific genius of Aqua Tofana went beyond its simple lethality. The true brilliance was in its subtlety. It was a perfectly clear liquid. It had no color, no odor, and no taste. It could be mixed into a glass of wine or a bowl of soup without a single trace. Just 4 to 6 drops, administered carefully, were enough to kill a healthy man. The core ingredients were a masterful blend of the era's most potent toxins. The primary killing agents were arsenic and lead, poisons known for their ability to mimic the symptoms of common, deadly diseases like cholera or dysentery. But the real artistry, the true brilliance of Julia's method, was in the dosage. She provided meticulous instructions to her clients. The poison shouldn't be given all at once. Instead, it had to be administered over a period of days, sometimes even weeks. The first small dose would produce symptoms that looked like a simple cold or a growing weakness. The victim might feel tired, a little unwell. A second dose, a day or two later, would bring on stomach cramps, intense thirst, and vomiting. By this point, the family would have called a doctor who would diagnose the man with a common stomach ailment. The third or fourth dose would deliver the final, lethal blow. The victim would die, and the death would appear entirely natural. A slow, progressive illness that simply overwhelmed the body. It fooled doctors, it fooled families, it fooled the church. The packaging was another layer of her scientific deception. Julia didn't sell her poison in a sinister, black bottle marked with a skull. Aqua Tofana was sold in beautiful, ornate glass vials or ceramic jars. Many were labeled Manna of Saint, Nicholas of Bari, a popular healing oil believed to cure blemishes and other skin ailments. The deadly concoction could sit on a woman's vanity table right next to her creams and perfumes, glinting in the candlelight. It was the perfect crime, sold as a cosmetic. An absolutely flawless plan, wouldn't you agree? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. An enterprise this successful and this dangerous cannot survive for 2 decades on word of mouth alone. To remain invisible to the authorities for so long required something more than just a perfect product. It required a network, a silent, sprawling conspiracy that was about to become far more powerful than she ever intended. It became something far bigger and far more organized than a simple apothecary selling a single product. This operation was so much more than one woman selling poison from a back room. Julia actually built a sophisticated, clandestine network that spread like a web across the city. It included other women like her, so-called wise women, who dealt in herbs and folk remedies. It included astrologers and fortune-tellers who could meet with unhappy wives without arousing suspicion. Her network even allegedly included a rogue Catholic priest, Father Girolamo, who helped her source the arsenic, the key ingredient, likely from the very workshops that produced chemicals for church art and sacraments. This network was a silent sisterhood, a secret society of the powerless. Her key associates, including her own daughter, Girolama Spara, acted as sales agents and distributors. They helped her reach women across every social class, from the wives of poor laborers to the unhappy spouses of powerful noblemen. They operated out of their own homes and shops, creating a decentralized system that was almost impossible to trace back to a single source. And here, deep in the records of her eventual trial, we discover the game-changing twist. Julia wasn't just selling a product, she was building an intelligence agency. Her clients, the very women she was liberating, became her eyes and ears. These women were trapped in the homes of powerful men. They overheard conversations about business, politics, and church secrets. Her network of black widows became something greater than a collection of grieving customers. It evolved into a society of informants, a web of spies bound together by their shared, deadly secret. Julia Tofana had created an underground railroad for abused wives, and in doing so, she had also created an information network that rivaled the city's own guards. The authorities, when they finally began to investigate, would realize they weren't just hunting a single poisoner. They were facing a hidden, city-wide conspiracy, orchestrated by a woman who had turned chemistry into an instrument of power. But an underground empire this large creates tremors, and when the whispers of so many convenient deaths finally reached the marble halls of the Vatican, the response would be absolute. Because now, we arrive at the heart of our story. The whispers, which began in the markets and alleyways, finally slithered their way through the marble halls of power, reaching the highest authority in Rome, the Vatican. And it is here, in the panicked reaction of the Church itself, that the official story of Julia Tofana crumbles to dust. It is here that we uncover the true reason the establishment was so terrified of a humble cosmetics maker. Why was Julia Tofana hunted down with such ferocity? The reason goes deeper than her being a simple murderer. She was destroyed because she represented a scientific and social revolution that threatened to upend the entire patriarchal order. Her true crime, in the eyes of the powerful, went beyond just killing men. She was using the hidden, rational science of chemistry to give real power to the powerless. Aqua Tofana had become something far more significant than a poison. It was a tool of liberation, a terrifying testament to the fact that knowledge, specifically repeatable, scientific knowledge, was a weapon that could dismantle the established hierarchy from the inside out. She was a chemist with a formula, not a witch performing incantations, and that made her infinitely more dangerous. The smoking gun that proves this thesis isn't found in a vial of poison. We find it in the sheer scale and frantic nature of the Vatican's response. Sometime in the 1650s, Pope Alexander VII grew alarmed. Priests were reporting a disturbing trend in the confessional. An unusual number of wives were admitting to poisoning their husbands. These were not isolated incidents. It was a quiet epidemic. So what do you think he did? Instead of launching a simple murder investigation, the Pope did something far more extreme. He unleashed the full, terrifying power of the Papal Inquisition. Why? Because a rational, scientific weapon that was affordable and available to the common woman was a far greater threat to the social order than random acts of witchcraft. Magic and curses could be dismissed as superstition, as the work of the devil, but a reliable, repeatable chemical formula was a tangible threat to the very fabric of a society built on the absolute authority of men. A formula could be taught, it could be shared, it could spread. The panic that led to her downfall began with a single terrified customer. A woman, having already bought the poison and stirred it into her husband's soup, was suddenly struck by a crisis of conscience. She begged him not to eat it. Her suspicious husband became enraged. He beat a confession out of her, and she named her supplier, Julia Tofana. Forewarned, Julia fled, seeking sanctuary in a local church, a place the authorities were forbidden to enter. But the Pope's men were determined. They devised a piece of brilliant, terrifying propaganda. They spread a rumor that Julia Tofana's work went beyond selling poison to individuals. They claimed she had poisoned the city's public water supply. It was a lie, but it worked. The public, whipped into a terrified frenzy, stormed the church. They dragged Julia from the altar and handed her over to the Inquisition. She was brutally tortured. Under the agony of the rack, she confessed to being responsible for the deaths of more than 600 men between the years 1633 and 1651. The number is likely an exaggeration, forced from her under duress. But the key is not just that they executed her. It is what they did next that reveals their true fear. In July of 1659, Julia Tofana, her daughter Girolama, and several of her key associates were publicly executed in Rome's famous Campo de' Fiori. Their bodies, along with those of dozens of their clients, were thrown into unmarked graves. The public spectacle was a clear and brutal message to the women of Rome. This is the price for stepping out of line. This is the price for seeking your own form of justice. But the true act of suppression, the real cover-up, came after the blood had been washed from the cobblestones. By order of Pope Alexander VII, all records of the investigation and the trial were to be sealed. They were locked away in the Vatican's vast, secret archives, hidden from the world. Why? Why hide the records of a successful investigation? Why bury the details of a notorious criminal's confession? Because the Pope and the men of the Inquisition did not want to publicize her methods. They understood the terrifying power of her simple, scientific effectiveness. They could not allow other women to learn that such a potent and accessible tool was within their reach. They had to control the story. So they set out to deliberately destroy her true legacy. They worked to transform Julia Tofana from a skilled chemist into a mythical monster. She became a witch, a she-devil, a diabolical sorceress who communed with dark spirits. Her story was twisted into a dark fairy tale, a cautionary legend designed to scare, not to inform. By burying the trial records, they buried the truth of her science. They erased the story of her sophisticated network and its revolutionary purpose. They successfully rewrote the narrative, changing it from a story of scientific rebellion into a simple, sordid tale of murder for hire. Julia Tofana's scientific legacy was deliberately and methodically erased from history. Julia Tofana's scientific legacy was deliberately erased from history, a chilling reminder that knowledge in the wrong hands is the ultimate threat to power. But while Tofana used the hidden science of chemistry to offer a dark escape to the oppressed, another figure from history twisted the very purpose of medicine itself. Not to liberate, but to control and to dominate. Unlike Julia, he was a celebrated physician, working in the open instead of from the shadows. He didn't need to sell poison in a bottle. He could simply prescribe it from a doctor's office, turning the science of healing into a terrifying weapon. To truly understand how fine the line is between savior and monster, you need to know the story of the most dangerous doctor in history. Click here to watch it now.